Hello everyone, and welcome to the October ground floor artist talk. My name is Jennifer, and I'm so excited to welcome our three artists today for the show Heirophanic Territories. The artists are Liza Butts, Tracy Knowles Ross, and Lauren Woods, and they're each going to talk a little bit about their work and their practice and introduce themselves. And then we'll take questions at the end. We'll get started. Um, Go ahead, Liza.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining. I'm Liza. I am a ground floor contemporary artist, and I have my studio here right behind the gallery. And I'm going to be presenting to you this installation that is a series of monoprints, and they're paired with a silkscreen photographic image that's on the wall. And I thought I'd start by introducing my work and talking about what got me interested in printmaking. I went to Washington University in St. Louis and started out as a major in printmaking. But when I moved to New York after school, I joined this wonderful workshop called the Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop. And it's this really incredible environment of artists working in print, at all different levels. They're master printers and they're learning people like myself. And I had the opportunity to be a monitor. And so I would go there every Sunday morning. It was sort of like my church, and just get to soak up everything that was happening in the environment and learn about different printmaking techniques. And so I got interested in making prints from fabric because Robert Blackburn was situated in Midtown. And I would take the train from Brooklyn to Midtown and get off at 42nd Street and walk down from 42nd Street to 39th Street, which was the fabric district or the garment district. And so I would be walking through and looking into these windows with, a lot of silks and chiffons and cotton. And I became really mesmerized with just the material itself, and also sort of the transparency of color and how it really mimicked how I was using oil paint at the time. So here on the right-hand side is a picture of me at Robert Blackburn, and it's this really small, like super condensed shop with like 8 different presses, and it's very typical New York. Every space is used for something. On the left-hand side is my workspace in Birmingham. It's an etching press, and I'm taking pieces of fabric and cutting them out and transferring swatches of ink onto the fabric. So the pieces that are hung are monoprints, and they're called monoprints because typically in printmaking, you have a matrix, and it's usually on plexiglass or copper, and it's unchanging. But what's different, and then you make additions from the matrix. But what's different about a monoprint is there's only one, and that's why it's called mono, because the matrix, it constantly changes. And usually after you make a print, you can't replicate it again. So it's kind of ephemeral in that way. So this is kind of an example of all the pieces of fabric I have collected with different inks, and every fabric behaves differently, and you never really know what it's going to do once you put it through the press. And I love that there's this element of chance, and it's sort of, you're setting up this situation to occur, but unlike painting, where painting is so much more direct, you never really know what's going to happen. And I love that contrast. So walking is a huge part of my practice, and I sort of think of discovery and wandering as being something very similar to painting and drawing. It's something that kind of reveals itself to you over time through this experience. And going on walks, I got really interested in the kudzu plant and these sort of amorphous forms that it created. And I liked how these abstract forms started to mirror the abstract language I was using in the prints. And I wanted to anchor it in that kind of photographic image. You know, the work is really dealing with origins. So origins of our personal mythology and origins of narratives in the landscape, and sort of peeling back layers to try and get to what's underneath. I love kudzu. Sort of the history of it is so interesting because it was brought to the US by railroad and highway developers. They were needing a plant to kind of cover the gashes in the landscape that they were creating. And it's so interesting because it's sort of this veil that covers unseen areas of the landscape that have become wild and untraveled over time. And it's this plant that's kind of meant to be this cover for these vulnerable, ugly, kind of cavernous places in the landscape. This is a picture process of what it's like working with silk screens. So it all starts with image transparencies that are then burned onto screens with a photosensitive emulsion. This is the image I settled on, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the titling for my installation, which is Nothing Left Unveiled. And to me, it's this idea of pulling back layers of time to see what's underneath and what's hidden, and sort of looking at something that isn't in plain sight or obvious to the basic eye, sort of excavating what has become overgrown and what's hiding. And I think in many ways, we're starting to do this sort of in our own regional landscape, you know, really digging deeply into histories and, you know, trying to clear away and get to the truths of things. But I wanted to pair this idea of the veil. You know, when I started working with silk, immediately it spoke to me like a veil, thinking about how veils are typically used in religious settings by women, and they're worn to hide and separate and conceal. But in this work, I'm thinking a little bit more about sort of the veils of ideas and thoughts, the non-physical part of our world that sort of becomes revealed to us through images and our perceptions of events and memories that become embedded in our experiences. And I wanted to talk about this by using objects to actually like embed into the prints. And so these are little pieces of like a shirt collar on the left, you can see the buttons, and then a waistband on the right from an old pair of pants. And so they sort of hint at something as it once was, but it's now unrecognizable, and it's just this fragment. And just thinking about sort of this impression of events that, you know, gets left on us in our consciousness and our minds through thoughts and memories and feelings, but also impressions that are left in the landscape as well. And just kind of to wrap it up, just to tying it back to the title that we chose, which is Heirophanic Territories. You know, Heirophanic means sort of the manifestation of something sacred in the physical. And so I'm sort of dealing with these messages, this sort of non-physical, these ideas as they're manifesting themselves in our lives and in the landscape. So thanks for listening, and I'll pass on to Lauren, or to Tracy, I think. Let me go ahead and stop sharing.
Hi. Okay. I'm Tracy Knowles-Ross, and I'm a ground floor artist. My studio now is at a Commonplace Woodlawn, but a big part of my work has to do with the place that I live. I'm out in Kilo Springs, and I have 5 acres of woods and a creek, and so much of my work has become about identity and landscape. So that's sort of just that's how I tied into the title that we chose. And now I'm going to leap over to the top. Hold on.
So the title of my show is The Outermost Layer of Being, or Nothing Stays the Same. This body of work is a subset of a larger group
Tracy,
of work.
you haven't shared,
Well,
I think, or I can't see your. screen.
Okay, let me click it again.
This worked in our warm up.
Yep, there it is.
There we go. Okay, great.
Okay, I don't know why that wouldn't share the button grayed out. I've never seen it do that. Okay, now I'll start.
So the title of my show is The Outermost Layer of Being, or Nothing Stays the Same. This body of work is a subset of a larger group of works I've been working on for a while called the Ship of Theseus series. So a few years ago, I became fascinated with the thought experiment known as the Ship of Theseus paradox by Plutarch. And in this thought experiment, Plutarch asks the question that if the ship that Theseus sailed on had been heavily repaired and taken apart piece by piece and reassembled with new pieces, would it still be the same ship in the end? If we apply this idea to the metaphysics of identity, we might also ask which you is really you. Is the person you were as a child really you? Is the person you'll be in 20 years really you? Or is it the person you aspire to be? Or is it simply the person you are right now, the outermost layer of you? If you think about all the skin cells and the hair and the brain cells and the memories that we burn through in a lifetime, we're constantly changing, right? We're not the same people we were as children, and we're not the same people today that we'll be tomorrow. So I love this idea. I'm really fascinated by this idea. In this body of work, the process of transforming found and broken objects is a way of questioning what we think we know about the world or what we think we know about ourselves, or at least that's my intent when I went into it. I'm exploring the way context, time, and memory affect our perception of identity. Maybe we're not who we used to be or who we hope to be. Maybe we're just the outermost layer of our being, the thing we are right now until we change again. I think that you could say we're flux. Maybe we're the process of change itself, not the stationary thing that we are in each moment, but that process of evolving. There's this book I really love by Arundhati Roy called The God of Small Things. And there's this quote in it that I actually had printed out and put in my sketchbook a couple of years ago, I think. And after my studio burned a couple of weeks ago, I thought of it and pulled it out again, and it's just perfect. So I'm going to read it to you now. Perhaps it's true that things can change in a day, that a few dozen hours can affect the outcome of whole lifetimes, and that when they do, these few dozen hours, like the salvaged remains of a burned house, the charred clock, the singed photograph, the scorched furniture, must be resurrected from the ruins and examined, preserved, accounted for. Little events, ordinary things, smashed and reconstituted, imbued with new meaning, suddenly they become the bleached bones of a story. I just love that. These are some of the bleached bones of my stories. I've used a lot of the objects from the creek behind my house, the remains of floods, and now I'm actually resurrecting objects that survived the fire, and I'm trying to put them into the work too. So here are some of those pieces that I salvaged. So this is an image of the installation here at ground floor. And this is another quote that I really love that I think just sums up what I'm trying to say with this show. All that you touch is change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. That's by Octavia Butler from The Parable of the Sower. It's a really great book. Okay, this piece is called the Hestian Hearth, after Hestia, the Greek goddess. She's the goddess of the hearth, home, architecture, domesticity, family. And it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek piece because I'm such a lousy housekeeper. There's always something broken at my house, but I love that I was able to make this piece that feels, attractive to me from broken things. It's a broken ceramic or porcelain dish, old children's clothes sewn into the pretty little puffs, rust and wood that I've pulled from the creek, and I put them together to make a new story, to change your perception and to do something that feels a little like an icon. Okay, and this piece called Oracle Bones, Divinations of the Anthropocene, it's me playing with the idea of fortune telling. I like the idea that objects that have moved through water are also moving through time. And I don't know, they carry stories and memories of the past into the future. So these are all things I gleaned from the creek, you know, the back of an old school chair, a rusty bolt, a bone, the glasses and the pottery shards. And I did a photo transfer, or a self-portrait of sorts, onto the pottery shards. And it's really just a statement about this period in time when we seem to be influencing the climate and the environment negatively. And it's a warning, I guess. There are two pieces called The Reach of Woundedness. I made both of these after reading an essay recently about Thomas Merton. And in it, they discuss this idea of reaching beyond this place of woundedness. And I think we're living in a really broken time. And just, I don't know, this really resonated with me. I like the ideas of hands reaching out beyond our propensity as humans for delusion and denial and destruction. Both of the hands had been broken before I made these pieces, and I glued them back together, and I put little paper turkey tail mushrooms, which I see as a symbol of resurrection or repair. And I turned the hands upward as a gesture of receiving or even giving. And the yarn represents time, winding around and around. You know, it's our memory, our stories, the things that we sometimes believe define us. And the red crosses obviously just represent wellness, at least for me. This piece called Inhabited by Spirits of Ash, Water, and Clay is the newest piece in the series. I made it after my studio burned. My space was filled with all sorts of tools and art supplies and art, but also precious sentimental objects. And, you know, it hurt when I lost it all. So I went out there and scavenged and dug up stuff in the ash, and I put them together and I made this piece. It feels a little like an altar. I used the ash from the studio and I mixed it with a medium, and I painted this piece with it. So it's, you know, it's very much of the place. I think the piece is not about sadness or remembrance, though. It feels more to me about accepting that everything's ephemeral and that everything changes form and purpose. The little bottles hold ash from the burned studio, water from the creek, and clay from the place that I live. And I think these are all parts of who I am, or what make me, me. The face was a sgraffito piece that I'd made several years ago for a show, and it survived the fire, at least this much of it. It's a self-portrait, and there's a crow over one of the eyes, but that black burned part is from the fire. And I don't know, I just thought it was beautiful. So I incorporated it in the piece. The little pieces that look like bells, I showed that image earlier. They were a string of lights I just bought to put in the garden outside my studio, and they burned before I ever got to hang them. But I love the little metal bits of the light bulbs that were left, and so I turned them into what looked like little lights, I guess, or bells. They live on. So the last piece in this series is called Lifeboat, Navigating the Waters Between Scylla and Charybdis. And Scylla and Charybdis were Greek or sea monsters in Greek mythology, and mariners used to have to venture into these uncharted waters in the Mediterranean and figure out which way they could go and which monster they thought they could battle. And it's where the saying, the lesser of two evils, probably comes from. But I think to be between Scylla and Charybdis means to be caught between two equally unpleasant alternatives. And that's what everything feels like right now. It's weird to think that we're often defined by what we choose not to do or where we choose not to go, but very often we are. But so I gave myself two lifeboats, so I have two options. the title of this show, The Outermost Layer of Being, speaks to my ideas regarding philosophical, spiritual, physical aspects of being. And sometimes, we're defined by the choices we make or the ones we don't make. And sometimes we're defined by sudden, unexpected change. And we don't really seem to be receptive of change as people. We don't like change. But I think these pieces are rooted in an acceptance that nothing can stay the same and that change isn't always a bad thing. And with any luck, it can be an exciting adventure. We just have to be careful and not crash into the rocks or burn down the house or be devoured by a sea monster. And so that's it. That's my show. That's my outermost layer of being today.
And that's it. Okay, Lauren.
Hello. Is my screen working okay? Okay. Hi, I'm Lauren Woods, and I'm a new member of Ground Floor Contemporary. Thanks for having me. I'm an artist from Mobile, currently based in Opelika, and I teach at Auburn University in the Department of Art and Art History. So this is my installation of works on paper in Heirophanic territories titled Eternal Return. In this short talk, I'm going to give a brief overview of my practice and the experiences behind these new works. Embodied expression, nature's consciousness, and the transformational properties of time are overarching themes in my practice. The concept of mythic time is contemplated visually through works that combine fabricated and observed reality with mutable narratives, much like what happens when we are in a dream state. Mythic time can be broadly defined as a perpetual present outside of a linear perception of time, an abstract awareness in which everything is happening all at once. This holistic perception of time reclaims principles of intuition, unity, and connection with natural cycles of transformation. Images and narratives envisioned in this ambiguous space of mythic time can exist between conflicting states, such as informed innocence, playful seriousness, perverse prettiness, clandestine sincerity, and contemporary nostalgia. Outside of painting, my artistic practice also includes video, animation, and dance performance. And this is a collaborative piece I recently did with a small company in New York called Sheep Meadow Dance Theater, where I designed the scenic elements for a live stream. So before I get into the new paintings in the show, I want to think about various modes of perception and how time relates to them. And it's interesting that everybody so far has talked about time in the show, and we didn't know what we were all going to make, and it all just came together so perfectly, I think. We often think of and experience time in a linear way. We think of past memories, present now, and predictions of the future. Different cultural and mythological approaches to time affect how people perceive reality. So somebody that has a more cyclical and kind of regenerative view of time has a different perception of their world versus someone that thinks of time ending and some kind of last final judgment where everything ends. I want to touch on another concept of time through some personal experiences. In a very basic way, I'm looking at the concept of time study in physics, where the past, present, and the future exist in space always, all at once, called space-time. An easy way to envision this is to think of our reality like a book. You have to, it's understood in a linear way because you read through it, but at the same time, it exists as a completed whole that you can go back and forth between the parts. And so I've had some instances in creating images from imagination where I felt like I've experienced this idea of space time in a tangible way. It almost feels like I created something and then I went back, and then in the future I saw where it came from. And so here's an example of a painting I made in 2019. I did this in Vermont Studio Center. And then during COVID, I took a lot of walks in Auburn in the forest preserve we have here, and I spotted this tree. I never saw it before I made the painting. I thought that was really awesome. Another time this happened to me is I made this painting from my imagination in 2019, and then this summer I got to go to Greece, which I'll talk about in a minute, and I saw this in real life and I didn't even know it existed before I made the painting. And it's not exactly the same, but I thought it was very similar and kind of cool. So through a summer research grant from Auburn University, I had the opportunity to spend a month in Athens to attend an artist residency and create a new body of work, which are in the show at ground floor. This trip allowed me to experience mythic time on a grand scale. I got to visit ancient sites that exist within contemporary spaces, and it compresses time in a really interesting way. So while I was there, I decided to return to some older motifs that I've explored over the years, just so I wouldn't have an artist block. Because a lot of times these opportunities present a tremendous pressure to produce something profound. So it becomes difficult to make anything. So I decided I would just revisit some things I've done in the past. So that's where this image came from, the original painting. This is the one that's in the show. So by going back to themes and images familiar to me and being inspired by the location I was in, I was able to create from a receptive place and not forcing ideas. So this is an older painting I was thinking about while I was there. And then this is the landscape. Super inspiring because it looks like a painting in real life. This is another image. I brought this with me because I don't like to have a studio that's empty. So I just brought a couple of small watercolors with me just to put up on the wall. And so it inspired this image, which was the first thing I started to paint while I was there. It's Ariadne. So the corona borealis is her crown in the sky. And then I was inspired by an older image of mine and then the landscape to create this. This is another image on the same theme, just from a different point of view. So I decided to even stay with the same idea, but explore different points of view with it. This is another painting that I brought with me. It's just a really small watercolor. And over the years, which you'll see in a minute, I've been painting these women floating in the sky. Just sometimes when I paint from imagination, I always want to put some type of embodiment of a figure in there. So I later found out that there's a little bit more, what would be the right word, significance to that motif than I realized when I went to Crete. So I took with my studio mate, we took a short trip to Heraklion, Crete, to go to the archaeological museum. And of course, the main star of the show is the snake goddess. Everybody wants to see her. And when I was in that room, I came across another theme that I was not aware of these sculpture, these it's called the Epiphany series, and they're all these different jewels and rings with engravings of the goddess doing various things, appearing to believers, and a lot of times she's shown floating in the sky. Here's a drawing of one. So this was on the wall in that same room, and when I saw this, it was really just like a major epiphany to me in my work. So it's a depiction of the coming of the goddess into the visible world of the faithful, basically what we're talking about with Hierophany. She appears as a tiny figure floating in the air, doing different things. Also, she's included with the male figure, and they seem to converse with each other as equals. And so I was thinking of some images I made a long time ago, 12 years ago, 2009. I started painting these images of the women floating in the sky. And originally they were based on my experiences with dance. And I just painted them over a number of years on and off. It was experiences of viewing dance performances and seeing these types of things happening in real life, and also experiencing it with my own body when I was a performer, this feeling of weightlessness and floating in the sky. And so that was my original background for this imagery. But then with seeing everything in Crete, I was able to give it a historical context. And so these are the two pictures I made, the first things I made when I returned back to Athens, and was directly inspired by that exhibit. And so I wanted to make a couple of images of it myself. And the title of this painting, Heirophany, kind of inspired our conversation for the title of the show. And we realized that all of our work had this theme that was common, and it was also within the meaning of the word, how these ideas came to us, and then they all came together. And so I just made a series of smaller paintings with this theme of the Epiphany, just to explore the concept a little bit deeper. And this is 2. These are all in the show. And then this one is 3. So through returning to past ideas and images, I was able to create new meaning both in my work and about gaining deeper understanding about my lived experience. And so I think I guess the theme of this whole talk is, if you do get some sort of opportunity where you're placed in a different location and you feel this pressure to, you have to produce something, you don't always have to make something new to make something new, if that makes sense. You can travel back in time to your past experience and gain deeper understanding. So thank you for looking and listening today.
Oh, it was so great, you guys. Thank you so much. You guys were each just so eloquent and perfect. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap? If you do, you can just unmute yourself and jump in. No? Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
Oh, first of all, that was just so pleasing and fantastic. And y'all are all 3 so thoughtful and personal. And I love how y'all all really pull from the landscape and nature and very spiritual work. I mean, it was just, I really enjoyed each of your talk. But I have a question for really all of you. Is do you start your work with a story or an idea in mind, or does the idea and the story evolve as you're creating the piece? So whoever wants to go first.
I'll go really quickly. I love that question. I think for me, actually, a lot of times seeing other pieces by other artists is sort of a catalyst So there is an installation by the artist Clea McKenna, who is an artist I really love, and she works in photography and also in print. And she had done this whole series of handkerchiefs, and that she was kind of talking about the process of grief, but it sort of made me think about the material of fabric that I was working with, and then it just helped me start to kind of move forward with some things. And then, it's very organic. For me, it doesn't start with something necessarily super complete.
Yeah, same here. Mine is usually a reaction to the pieces that I find. So if I go out and I wander the creek and I find a certain number of pieces of pottery or bone, I react to that. But because I've been doing it for so long, I now have buckets and bowls of things that I've gleaned, and patterns start to emerge. And it's that I feel the work becoming referential of previous work, but from the same space and the same routines of going and gleaning, if that makes sense. So it's cyclical. And I think it's, the theme of mine being change. I feel the work changing, even though it's coming from the same place. Does that make sense to you? It's like the change changes the change. So the work is becoming something else. So I'm always surprised by the stories too. And I am heavily influenced by literature. Obviously, I put 2 quotes in this talk because I write a lot, but I also cut out quotes from things I'm reading and collect them. And during COVID, there's been a lot of audiobooks playing in my studio. So I say literature probably influences me a lot, but I think even then I draw from metaphors, and it's not literal interpretations of the things I'm reading so much as like a gut reaction to what I felt when I listened to the book. So that's me.
Interesting.
Okay. I have some similarities in the sense I get ideas from various places, like walking. I get a lot of ideas just when I'm turn my brain off, reading. But then another place I get ideas from, especially for the way I present the work, is I typically work in a figurative manner, is I'm trying to convey some sort of feeling I might have in my own body onto paper. And so a lot of times, like those floating women paintings, I've tended to have made those when I felt detached from a situation, or I feel if I'm put in a new place and I don't feel connected to it, and I just feel like I'm kind of floating around for a while, I tend to make those works. So it's kind of like an embodiment of a feeling. And even the way I hung the work for this show, it was inspired by a show I saw by Nancy Sparrow, where the art was hung at different heights. And I remember looking at that show and how I had to use my body and be in my body to see it. And so I just thought I wanted to kind of emulate that with my work with this one.
I loved so much at the opening when people would kneel down to see your low hung pieces. It looked like reverence from outside, watching people inside. It's discombobulating to look down on the sky. And so those low pieces, it felt unnatural to be above your sky, and it pulls your body down. It's inadvertent. You just want to go down to be at the right level to look at it. And so I kept watching from outside through the window, and everybody would either bend down or kneel to see it. And it was like a dance. And you had the last piece hanging high enough that short people like me had to step on tiptoe to meet the horizon. So you made me dance whether I wanted to or not, because I moved through your installation like that. And I was very aware that you were a dancer and that you had inadvertently choreographed, or maybe intentionally choreographed, a piece with that. And I wish there had been a camera videotaping the people move through. It was like writing or music or something. It was just really nice. It was a fun way to experience your show. So it wasn't just 2D pieces hanging on the wall. There was something interactive there that was fun. And I'm not sure I would have seen it if we hadn't been outside because of COVID rules, but because we were trying to be cautious about space, it was really fun to watch people interact with your wall. I enjoyed that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Rebecca, for that really great question. I think that from now on, I'm gonna propose a question for all three of the artists. That was such a great way to do it. You know, we always have to kind of fill time if nobody wants to jump in and volunteer to ask questions. So thanks, that was great. And thanks for all your guys' comments and responses. We'll go ahead and wrap. This was such a good talk.
That was great talk.
Guys. Yeah. So okay, thanks again. And thank you so much to all of our participants. Thanks for visiting us today on Zoom. We hope to see you in the gallery. So meaningful to have your participation in these talks. So thanks. All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Great show. Great
Thank
talk.
you.